Okay. So now you've all had a chance to stare at this, so you've probably somewhat figured it out. So mammals were the first branch off of this, what led to all these different vertebrates that we know of. The very next branch is turtles. So, and then after turtles, the crocodilians and the dinosaurs, and birds are really just a branch off the dinosaurs. And then tuataras, which are kind of like lizards, they live in New Zealand. And then lastly, snakes and lizards. So if you're going to talk about reptiles and include the turtles, then you have to include the birds as well. So we're talking about other birds besides birds. And in Massachusetts, there are 53 species and 11 salamanders, 10 anurans, which are frogs and toads, fancy word for that, 17 turtles, but 5 of them are sea turtles. So there's only 12 that live on land, 14 snakes, and 1 introduced lizard. And we're going to be showing you slides of these things, but we wanted to say something about being discrete. So I guess the best way to think about herping is to think of it kind of like finding owls in the wintertime and wanting to be circumspect about what you tell people and whether or not it should be like widely reported. Because if you're just going out birding, like let's say you were going to look for the prothonotary warbler, it's a rare bird, but anybody could go there. Birds are protected. No one's going to leave with the prothonotary warbler in their pocket. No one's going to sell it to someone in Germany. No one's going to do anything. That's not the way birding works. But in herp world, it does sometimes work that way. And so we tend not to give out locations very often. So don't take it personally, but we'll talk about habitats and things, but we're not necessarily going to be saying this is where you should go to see that, although we do in a few cases. So we're going to start with salamanders, and because we never start with salamanders, so why not? And we're going to do this kind of in the order that you might see things if you were out herping during the year, at least within each group. So this is a spotted salamander. It is a big salamander in this group called Ambystoma. And ambystomids are also called mole salamanders. They live in the ground most of the time, except for the first warm, rainy night in spring when they all go to their vernal pools. So some of you may already know these guys. Maybe you've helped cross them. In Amherst, they have places where they even close the roads, and they have places for the salamanders to cross under the roads. And so these are the famous salamanders that's all done for, spotted salamander. So this is kind of the scene that you would see if you were seeing them on those first warm spring nights. And a lot of people help to cross them, and it's a really good thing. They are the commonest of our mole salamanders, but there is another species, Jefferson, that you could also be seeing if you're out doing that crossing. I would say you're much, much, much more likely to be seeing spotted salamanders and not so likely to be seeing these because they're state listed and they're rare in the sense of there's only a few pools that they'll use compared to a lot of different vernal pools that the spotteds will use. They're also, they tend to hybridize with this next species. You can see that these guys are kind of gray. They're also big. They can be, again, like 6 inches long. They're kind of grayish, brownish, not really black, but they have this peppering of light blue spots on their side. This is the blue spotted, which is the one they hybridize with. This was actually taken out in Eastern Mass, where there are some more pure looking populations of blue spotted. But as far as we know, everywhere in Massachusetts, all of the ones that you see, whether they're Jefferson or blue spotted, are actually hybrids. They're also state listed. And we tried I think that we've managed to label each state listed species in this slideshow so you'll know which ones are protected.
It's the marbled salamander. These are the guys that, usually you see these more commonly in the fall because they kind of breed a little bit differently than the other salamanders. The other most salamanders are usually the big springtime vernal pool breeders. These guys actually go to the vernal pool sites in the fall, and they're kind of waiting for the fall rains to happen. And then once those fall rains happen, they'll lay their eggs, and then those eggs will hatch, and they kind of get to develop a little bit over the winter. So come springtime, they kind of have a jump start on the other salamanders, and hopefully they can get big and get gorgeous and beautiful like this handsome guy.
Yeah, they're kind of predatory actually on the other things that are just hatching out in the spring. So because they've had that head start, they're able to survive and grow by eating those things. So there are some, well, this is one of our truly aquatic salamanders, the eastern newt. And this is also something that you can see in the early spring and even into the winter, but it tends to live in water, or it pretty much has to live in water, at least in this phase. So they're kind of interesting life cycle. They have adults like this that are aquatic. They lay eggs, they hatch into larvae that are also aquatic and live in the water. And then they have this terrestrial stage called the red eft. So this is the one that you guys probably see regularly if you're out birding. If you're in the woods on a moist day, if it's just rained, then these guys are sometimes all over the trail and you have to be careful not to walk on them. So they're a couple inches, 2-3 inches long and very beautiful, bright red, probably because they're toxic. And because they're toxic and bright red, there are some other salamanders that we have around here that might very well be mimics of them. So this is one of them. The eastern redback salamander is probably the most common salamander that we have, and probably one of the most common vertebrates in the northeastern forest. If you turn over 10 logs or rocks out in the woods, even behind your house, you'll probably find an eastern redback salamander. They don't usually look like this, though. There's a few populations in Western Mass that have this red phase where they're all completely red. This guy has a little black on his tail here, but pretty much all red. And the theory is that these are mimics then of red efts because they're totally edible if you like salamanders, but because they look all red like a red eft, presumably they would get left alone. So normally looks like. It also comes in what's called a lead-backed phase rather than just a red-backed. And the lead-backed would be all this slatey dark color like the sides of the normal red-backed phase. And instead of having the red down the back, it would just be all that color. Here's some red-backed salamanders. This is kind of what they normally look like, I think, because people pick them up and hold them in their hand. And this is chubby salamander, but it's not nearly as big as it will eventually get. This is another of our local salamanders that might be a mimic of the redback salamander. I'll let Joe talk about this one.
Yeah, these guys like to live in like sphagnum bogs and things like here. You can see the female is probably sitting there in a sphagnum moss tussock there, probably getting ready to lay her eggs. These are kind of little slender salamanders. Usually you can see them like counting, like looking around their rib areas. You can usually see a little costal ribs and arches there. Don't try to count the toes. You're not going to be able to count 4 toes easily on these things here. Easier field marks to look at is usually somewhere near the base of the tail. It's tough to see on this picture, but usually see a little bit of a constriction around the base of the tail. Again, don't try to count the toes. More importantly, if you flip it over, this has a white belly and there's going to be a lot of black spots on the bottom of it there. So that's the better field marks to look for than 4 toes.
They lay their eggs in these little sphagnum tussocks, and they'll lay the eggs in a position and the female will stay there with the eggs, and they'll when the eggs hatch, the larvae will fall out of the sphagnum and plop into the water that's right beneath it. So they kind of have things worked out so that works to keep the egg safe above the water but moist, and then the larvae can just drop right down into the water. We do have a couple of common, I would say, mostly aquatic salamanders, and this is one of them. The other one is northern dusky. The northern dusky is all blackish brown, and this guy is kind of a golden color and more slender. If you're turning over rocks at the edge of a stream, you can find either one, although I think these guys, two-lined, are probably a little bit more common. So if you turn over a rock that's kind of right along the edge of even small woodland streams, as long as they don't go completely dry in the summer, you'll see little golden salamanders like writhing around and going as fast as they can to get into the water, and that's northern two-lined. And northern dusky is pretty similar, except they're all dark. Dusky salamanders, you can see that this salamander has legs, front and back legs that look about the same. Dusky salamanders belong to a genus called Desmognathus, and all the Desmognathus salamanders have back legs that are twice as big and fat as their front legs. So that's another good way to tell them apart from two-lined. There's lots of Desmognathus salamanders in the world, and one of our local guys, Steve Tilley, who is a retired professor from Smith College, is one of the world's experts on Desmognathus salamanders, and actually just recently had a new species named after him. So famous local herpetological guy. This is, I would say, the real prize of aquatic salamanders. If you're out turning over rocks in one of those little streams and you see a big, fat, orangey pink 6-inch salamander, that again is quick, but you could potentially be quicker. That's the spring salamander. These guys are fantastic to see because they're not common, but they're really cool. They have a big blunt head and this pale line here, and they are really big. So this one is in a Tupperware container. I think that's my hand.
Yeah, your hand.
My hand. Yeah. You can see again the pale line there in this sort of orangey pinkish color. They're amazing, amazing creatures.
Hey, Bill, we have a question here. Question from Joseph. Okay, say I turn over a rock and find a salamander. How do I replace the rock without harming the salamander?
We usually pick them up, put the rock down, and then let the salamander go at the edge of the rock where it can climb back under. And yes, that's a good question. If you just pick it up, look at the salamander and drop the rock, that would be bad.
And it's always nice for most of the herp stuff. If you're flipping over rocks or branches or anything like that, there, try to return it to where you see it. That way the habitat doesn't get too disturbed.
Yeah. I'll let you talk about that.
And this is the mud puppy. This is the biggest salamander we have in Massachusetts. Probably most likely introduced from scientific school things there. This is usually found in the Connecticut River and the Deerfield and some of the other tributaries. Not easy to see. Sometimes fishermen catch them on their lines while they're fishing, and they hate them because they're a pain in the neck to get off the hook. But a great place to see them is to go up to the Turner's Falls Canal, and every September, usually the third week, they'll drain the canal so they can do maintenance on the hydroelectric plant. And as the canal is draining, all these guys are scrambling out of the rocks and trying to follow the water down because they have to stay in the water. And then they get confined down to a little trickle stream in the bottom of it there. And you can easily go down there and find a bunch of these guys here and hopefully, save some and move some around before the birds eat them at all there. This is still the largest one. I'm still hoping to do a hellbender release project in Massachusetts there, but don't let the state herpetologist know about that, though.
Yeah, I don't think that would go over well. Hellbenders are the largest salamander in the eastern U.S., and they do live in the Susquehanna drainage, but they don't live in the Connecticut River anywhere near us. Sadly, not yet. So moving on away from salamanders, there are the toads and the frogs, and we're going to talk about the toads first because there's really only a couple to talk about. And we have two in Massachusetts that are in this genus Anaxyrus. They used to be in the genus Bufo, but Bufo is now confined to the European ones, and they've changed our American ones to this genus Anaxyrus. So Anaxyrus americanus is the common American toad that everyone probably has in their garden. Fowler's toad maybe occurs here in the valley, or at least maybe hybrids, but mostly they're found in sandy places. So like Plymouth County in the Cape is a really good place to see a lot of Fowler's toads. But the reason we put this in here is not because we live in Virginia, but because this was a good place to see what the differences are between the two. So this is American toad. The most famous difference, I think, is that each black spot in American toad generally has just one wart, sometimes two. In Fowler's toad, there's often multiple warts in each black spot. So I think that's the difference that most people think of. If you turn them over, though, American toads are kind of peppered with all these black spots, and Fowler's toads, pure Fowler's toads, are usually unspotted. This is, I think, kind of hard to see, but if you look at the tibia, which is, so this is the foot here, and this is the upper leg here. So this part of the leg has these enlarged warts here on the American toad. And on the Fowler's toad, there's warts, but they're just kind of small warts. They're not big and pointy like the ones on American toad. And then the other way to tell is by listening, because this is an American toad, and it goes on and on. I think the females choose the male that doesn't have to take a breath because they really sing for a long time. And then this is Fowler's toad. Quite different. I've never heard this in the valley, so I really don't think that Fowler's toads, at least things that sing this song, but I've also never been everywhere in the valley, so I can't say for sure. But out east, this would be the common thing you would hear in like pine barrens. So again, kind of going in order from spring to fall, as far as the frogs are concerned, the very first frog that we get in the spring is the wood frog. These guys are famous for freezing solid all winter and then thawing out in the spring and just going about their lives. And they live really far north, way up into Canada. And they are the first ones out. So when you're moving those spotted salamanders on the roads in Amherst in the spring, on that first warm, rainy night, you're probably also seeing wood frogs at the same time. They have just a few weeks where they'll go to their vernal pool. And this is what they sound like. Lots of you have probably heard this sound. Maybe you've wondered, some of you, what it was. Now you know. They sound like ducks, kind of quacking. It's a great sound because for me anyway, it just sounds like the end of winter and the beginning of spring. It's great to hear. This is the other great to hear sound in the spring that everybody knows, I think. The spring peeper. They are tiny little frogs of maybe an inch or so. They have this cross on their back, hence the Latin name Pseudacris crucifer. And they have an extremely familiar sound. So when there's just one or two, they sound like this. They do that peeping. Trying to find one when it's doing this seems almost impossible, but occasionally we have. When there's a lot of them, people say they sound like sleigh bells in the distance. Great sound. Then they also have this call that's their aggressive call. So if you hear that, you better run for your life. This is an occasional sound, but not one that I feel like I hear most of the time. And then in the fall, they move toward their vernal pools. Some of them do anyway, and they'll give this squeaky call. This is another frog that we hear a lot of and see a lot of even in our own yard, gray tree frogs. Okay, so they're, again, like I said about wood frogs, they're sort of masters of camouflage. They have the ability to change their color as adults, so they can look like this. Sometimes they can be dark slaty gray. They can also be almost white with black markings, which is really pretty. And then the young ones, when they first transform from tadpoles, look like this. They're only about not even an inch long, maybe even a half inch. Tiny, tiny little froglets that you can see really match the vegetation well. And they have this great sound. To me, this always sounds like a summer evening after a thunderstorm. Here they have some frog friends in the background too. It's a great sound.
These are the ones commonly people will find attached to their houses or in their shutters, or if you have a pool and you're taking off the cover of the pool, a lot of times they'll just be hanging out underneath the cover of the pool or in the pool cover there. So just scoop them out and move them into the woods.
And one of what you heard in the background there singing with the gray tree frog was this guy, the green frog. This is another really common frog. And I sort of associate this one with summer also. And because of the sound, to me, it just sounds like a really hot summer day, because they're probably one of the only things calling. Even the birds are quiet. You'll hear these guys out in the hot, humid forest. Another great frog sound. This is our biggest frog. I meant to show you on the green frog photo. So the American bullfrog is really big, but I mean, obviously they don't start out really big. They can be smaller to start with, and then they grow over time. And when they're smaller, you can mistake them for green frogs, except that all frogs have what's called a lateral line, and all except the bullfrog, their lateral line is a ridge that goes all the way from front to back. But bullfrogs have the ridge just curve around this eardrum that's called the tympanum. This is a male because his tympanum's bigger than his eye, and also because male bullfrogs have this bright yellow throat. And they also have a really distinctive, it says juggle. It's a great song. And then the last slide of a local frog that we have is pickerel frog. And we put this in here. We didn't try to put in slides or talk about every single herp because we didn't really have time for that. So we kind of picked ones that seemed like the most common or representative. And this guy is probably the most likely frog that you could see if you're out in a meadow somewhere birding. The other frogs are often more either in pools or ponds or something, or in the woods. These guys will be out in fields, moist fields, and usually not really far from water, but they can be pretty far away from water, and they'll leap away. But if you get a look at them, first of all, it's our only brown frog. They have no green on them, which is something that took me years to realize, actually, that they're just all brown. And they also have these parallel rows of rectangular spots down the back, and they have a great snore called. We have another frog called northern leopard frog that's less common. That also has a snore sound, but that one snores a lot longer. Each snore is about 2 seconds or so. And then finally, we put in this other frog that does not live anywhere near well, I shouldn't say that. It doesn't live in Massachusetts at all. And it does live north of us, though. And a lot of the people in the bird club, I think, go birding like around Pittsburgh, New Hampshire, or northern New Hampshire, northern Vermont, to look for some of those boreal things, spruce grouse and the black-backed and three-toed woodpecker and those birds. So if you're up there, look for this guy, because they're really a northern specialist, and you're not going to see them around here. So it's a herp you could add to your life list if you're looking around up there. They're really cool. They are probably called mink frog because they have this interesting odor. If you pick one up, it has this odor, and I think it smells like onions, but I think people used to think it smelled like mink. So they also have a really, really distinctive call.
Hello, my baby. Hello, my honey. Hello, my ragtime gal. Send me a kiss by wire. Baby, my heart's on fire.
So actually, they sound like this. So they have this cut, cut, cut call. And when there's a lot of them, it sounds like this. So that's it for music, because none of the other herps make any noise. Well, maybe an occasional hiss, but we're moving on to turtles. So we put this in here just because it's like the most famous common turtle we have. And I think everybody has seen piles of painted turtles sitting on rocks and logs, and they're really common. They have this striped head, red around the sides, this sort of classic flat domed shape. But we do have another turtle that I don't think that you can mistake painted turtles so much for other turtles, but you might mistake this guy for a painted turtle. So They can be this, they're about the same size as a painted turtle, sometimes a little smaller. And if you see them at a distance, or if they're like all wet and shiny, it can be hard to tell from a painted. But if you get a good look, if you're out birding, you have your binoculars, so take a good look. And they have these starry yellow spots all over their carapace, and then more yellow spots on the head. And we can tell you a place to look for these actually is the bike path in Amherst and Hadley. So if you're birding on the bike path, there are various places on the bike path where you can look down and see like marshy wetland type areas. And if you are birding there, look down in those areas. Right now is the best time to look. Like I would say from late April until the end of May is the best time, because then the vegetation gets too big and these guys aren't basking as much anyway. But you can go out and look with your binoculars, and sometimes some of what you'll see if you see turtles will be these guys and not painted. So they're very cool. They used to be state listed actually, but I guess they decided they were common enough that that wasn't necessary.
Landings turtles, they don't really occur too much in Western Massachusetts, and they have a really weird distribution pattern. They're mainly in the upper Midwest, and then there's a couple spots in the Northeast and the mid-Atlantic areas there. We see these more out in the eastern part of the state. A great place to go see them if you really want to go look for them is either, Great Meadows, or even better is Oxbow. And this is a good time of year to go because, again, the vegetation isn't that bad and you can see them really nicely. But if you go to Oxbow, I will recommend bringing 4 gallons of DEET with you because it is the most mosquito infested place that I have ever been to. Even worse than the what is that stupid trail in Florida that's like,
oh yeah, the
snake bite trail. I think
right.
it was worse than that. You would literally just be scraping off things. We got to this parking lot one time to go look for them there. We're like, wow, it's such a beautiful day. There was nobody here. Why? And then 100 meters into the swampy area, we found out exactly why there was nobody there. So wear lots of DEET, wear something that covers every inch of your body, but you'll be rewarded to see this beautiful turtle, really bright yellow throat and nice big dome shell with lots of yellow spots on it.
Yeah, and a really uncommon species actually too. You can see they're state listed, and they're great to see. They're being head started. There's a guy, Brian Windmiller, who's associated with the New England Zoo. He used to have this thing called grassroots conservation, and they kind of merged with the New England Zoo, and they head start lots of these guys every year, and it's really made a big difference in their population. So they were really endangered, and now there's more of them, so it's good. This is another state listed species that I think is one of the coolest turtles, and definitely one of the coolest turtles that we have here in Massachusetts that you can actually have a chance of running across and seeing, although saying exactly where is kind of difficult. They spend the winter actually in rivers and streams and up under banks and things. And so they're, in a sense, kind of semi-aquatic. And if it's a really hot, dry summer, they'll go back to the wet areas and maybe even back into the water. But during most of the summer, they're found in fields and woods that are not really far from water, and tend to be moister, more, I would say, mesic forests. But so you do run across them every once in a while, and they're really cool. They're big, I would say 6 to 8 inches long sometimes. And I think they're called wood turtle more because of like their habitat and so forth. But I really think they should be called wood turtle because of the way their shell looks and feels, because it just absolutely feels like it's carved out of this like hard tropical hardwood or something. The whole turtle is just kind of this. It just feels like an old wise animal. Don't pick it up because it's state listed, but
You can see we interrupted it eating its favorite meal,
yeah,
slugs.
They love slugs. They love berries. They're omnivores, but they definitely love slugs. This is our other really cool turtle, again, state listed, probably because we're kind of at the northern edge of its range. And this is the eastern box turtle. And I think they're very familiar to people, even though you don't get to see them very often, because there are really only a few places in the valley where you can go to find them. And I think most people know what a box turtle is and what a box turtle looks like. It's just that we hardly ever get to see them. If you look closely, and you may have seen this on a couple of the other, like the spotted turtle had these same notches. So this means that this turtle was part of a study, and the scientist, whoever was working on them, the wildlife biologist, they cut these little arrowhead-shaped notches into various scutes. So all of these things on the turtle shell are called scutes. And these are called marginal scutes, each one of these that goes around the edge because they're on the margin. And each marginal scute has a number. And I mean, for all turtles, it's just a method to numbering them. And so you can put a notch in a particular thing and write down the number, the scute number, the series of numbers, and then you can go back and identify that turtle again and keep records on it. So it's a way of identifying them without having to do anything more serious than just cutting a little notch in their shell. A few little notches doesn't seem to hurt them. So pretty cool. And obviously this guy's lived with it for a long time because the notches are starting to get filled in as the shell's been growing over the years. This is a really amazing adventure that we had. We did a big herp year about 10 years ago where we tried to see all the herps in Massachusetts. And at the end of the year in November, we went out to Wellfleet, to the Mass Audubon Sanctuary in Wellfleet, and did a sea turtle weekend. And you can probably still do this. You just have to look at Mass Audubon's programs out at the Wellfleet Sanctuary, and you can sign up. You can spend a whole weekend learning about and going on trips and finding sea turtles. So it's a long story about why this happens, and I wish we had time, we could tell you the whole story. But the turtles in the fall get trapped in Cape Cod, and as it gets colder and colder, it gets cold from north to south. And so the turtles in the southern part are still swimming around, but if they try to go north to get out of Cape Cod, it gets too cold, so they turn around. But eventually it gets too cold throughout the entire Cape Cod Bay, and they get what's called cold stunned. And at that point, they can't swim or do anything. They just float around like pieces of debris, and they get washed up on shore, but they're still alive. So they get rescued. They have, well, you can tell the rest of the
Yeah,
story.
they have like Mass Audubon has arranged a whole slew team of people, and they go out at every high tide, whether it's at 9 in the morning or 3 o'clock at night, and people go out and search pretty much every inch of the beaches along all Cape Cod Bay. And if they find them, they call them in, and then they get transported over to Mass Audubon. Mass Audubon then arranges a kind of a shuttle crew that brings them up to the aquarium up in Boston, and then they kind of get rehabilitated, and they usually get shipped down to the south, like to Florida or the Carolinas, and then they get released again there. So there's a great success story getting these guys back into the water.
Yeah, and they do hundreds of these every year. Kemp's Ridley's, there's 7 sea turtle species. So this one is one of the rarest, Kemp's Ridley. And they've made a difference, I think, in their population over the years that they've been doing this. And then the other, there's a big turtle called loggerhead sea turtle, and that tends to get cold stunned in December because they're bigger, they move around longer, but eventually it gets too cold even for them. So anyway, if you're interested, check out Wellfleet's schedule, and you could probably go do this yourself. The last turtle we're going
to have that came to the chat. What is the importance of state listing?
So it means that the state of Massachusetts, the Natural Heritage and Endangered Species Program, puts species on their list as either being of special concern, threatened, or endangered. But if they're on the list for any of those 3 categories, then you can't pick them up. You can't keep them without a permit. You basically can't do anything to them without getting permission from the state. You can take a picture, but that's about it. The other species that are not state listed, you're allowed to have 2 as pets if you want. There's some, I would say, probably not a good idea because you're not going to be able to take very good care of them, depending on what they eat or whatever. But if they're not state listed, they're legally allowed to be, you're allowed to keep 2. But if they're state listed, no, and you're not supposed to even touch them. Hopefully that answers the question. If you have more, just let us know. These guys are introduced, not protected. You can have one for a pet if you don't mind being bitten like a snapping turtle. And they're also gigantic. I'm just kidding about the pet thing. These would make horrible pets. But these guys, we can also tell you exactly where to see them. So if you take the Route 116 road from South Hadley Falls to Holyoke, and on the Holyoke side, park in the Fish Ladder parking lot, then walk back down to the bridge, cross the bridge to the south side of the bridge, stay on the Holyoke side and look downriver. Don't look at the Holyoke bank itself, but right across from that is an island. And the side of the island that faces Holyoke, the west-facing side, has a long, sandy, slopey sort of beach. And if you look on that beach on a warm, sunny day, you may see these things that look like pancakes laying there with their feet spread out on the beach. And that's, as far as we know, the only place in the state where you can see eastern spiny softshell. No one really knows how they got there, but they're there in different sizes now, really big ones and little ones. So I think they're reproducing. So anyway, and they live as far north as Michigan in the central US. So they don't seem to have a problem with the winter or anything. So it seems like they're here to stay. Really cool. Nice little field trip. And the fish ladder is worth a visit too. So moving on to the last group, and just like with a painted turtle, I would say that everyone knows what a garter snake is. So yeah, you've seen these guys many times, I'm sure, and not, they're kind of 2 or 3 feet long, relatively harmless. Usually great to see, fun. They're not so common that they're boring. But one of the other things to look for, though, that looks very much like a garter snake is its congener, the eastern ribbon snake. And this guy is not so common and not so easy to tell from a garter snake. As you can see, I mean, if you just looked at this quickly, it looks like a garter snake. It does have a couple of differences, though. It has this mahogany stripe all the way down each side. So that's a really good way to tell. I would say that when you see these guys, they're often in a field. Like one of the good places to see these is if you're hiking in the Quabbin. If you go down some of the Quabbin gates and there are meadows and you're walking along the road, but there's also fields or meadows on either side. That seems like the place where we've seen ribbon snakes the most. And they move really fast and they're hard to see well, but they're not protected, so you can grab one and pick it up and look at it. And if you can get a good look, then seeing this little mark in front of the eye, that's another diagnostic feature for ribbon snake. We have 2 big black snakes in Massachusetts. One of them is the eastern rat snake. And this is also a state-listed species, again, probably because we live at the very northern edge of its range. There's only a few places in the state where you can find these. And they are really big, up to 6 feet long or so. And just a couple things I want you to notice about this photograph. First of all, the snake is black, but it's really shiny black, like patent leather. Do they still make patent leather? I don't know. Anyway, they're really shiny black. They have white chins and white bellies, but the white chins have these black marks between each lip scale, and the bellies have black blotches. And the other big black snake that we have that's much more common and much more likely to be seen is the black racer. These guys are also dark, but they're more of a slaty color. They're not as like a shiny patent leather color. And whereas the black rat snake is painted in a glossy finish, this guy's painted in a satin finish. It also has a white lip, but it's completely white and a white belly. It doesn't have any black lip marks or anything. We put another slide in just again to emphasize the differences. So rat snake, slate gray color. Racer, slate gray color, rat snake, shiny black color, racer, smooth scale, rat snake, slightly keeled scale. So keeled scales, it's hard to see, I think, on this rat snake photo, but if you look at each one of these individual scales, they have a ridge down the middle, and so they're keeled. And you can divide snakes in many ways, but there are really those snakes that have keeled scales and those snakes that have smooth scales. So this one has slightly keeled, this one is smooth. White chin, black lip lines, and the other way you can tell.
If you want to get bit, pick up a black racer and you will get bit multiple times.
Yeah, they're really, really nasty. They'll actually get up like a cobra you know, like in that upright position. And when I was a little kid, I shouldn't really tell this story, but I was like 8 years old and I caught a black racer in a box. It was in a creek bed near in the horse pasture near where I lived. And so I ran home and got this big box and I somehow got the racer into the box. And you know, can I keep it? Can I keep it? No. Can I keep it? No, no. So finally I went out in the orchard and let it go. And as soon as it came out of the box, it reared up like a cobra and came straight at me. And I screamed like a little girl and ran in the house. I still remember being scared to death of that snake. But anyway, they are really aggressive. Whereas rat snakes, you cannot pick them up because they are state listed. But if you happen to pick one up, they are
In
very
another
calm.
state where they're not state listed.
Right, they are very calm snakes. Usually, even a wild rat snake will just let you hold it as though it was somebody's pet. They're very calm snakes. And if you do run across one in the wild, often they'll just kind of sit there, or maybe they'll slowly move off. But a racer will get all agitated and carry on and take off, and they're just very different demeanors. So the next snake is eastern hognose, protected in Massachusetts, named after this upturned lower lip, and the rostral scale here is upturned. They're found in sandy soils and pine barrens because they eat a lot of toads, and they are mildly venomous. But the cool thing about hognose is that they have these amazing behaviors. So speaking of cobras, this is one of the behaviors that a hognose will do. It inflates, actually, well, not inflates, but it spreads the bones along the ribs along the side of the neck and opens its mouth really wide. You can actually see the rear fangs here because its mouth is so wide. It has mild venom glands that, and these are used to puncture toads when they go to swallow them. I should let you talk more about their behavior here.
No, yeah, so they definitely can rear up like cobras. They'll hiss. If they get really, really worried about everything there, they'll play dead. They'll just roll over and just act dead. Sometimes they'll puke up their last meal. And the funny thing is, you know, when this guy here is acting dead, if you flip it over, it'll flip back over onto its back to show you that it's really, truly dead. And they also come in some great color morphs there. This picture here, there was the one before that was like that grayish color. This one is like a brownish color, and this is a gorgeous little tan color there. So there's three nice color morphs that live in our area.
Yeah, they're great snakes. They're not common in the valley, but they are found here.
And despite all these threats, I have never heard of anybody being bit by a hognose snake.
Yeah, again, they're fairly calm, but they will do these crazy things if they're excited. So
One question we have here is, what did you do to get this guy to open its mouth?
well, just picked it up, actually. When we took those photos, it was in 2013, and we were in Plymouth. And at that time, hognose were actually not protected, but they are now. I guess I hope that that's true, and that I'm not telling you that we picked up snakes that were protected at the time, but I'm pretty sure they weren't, but they are now. And the state has actually been doing some things in various places to try to enhance the habitat, not just for hognose, for some other protected critters too. But yeah, all we did was pick it up.
No, the snake was just trying to defend itself and start bluffing and trying to scare us off.
Yeah, so that snake with its mouth open was the same snake that was playing dead in the other slide that was next to it. There were 3 of those hognose snakes under one piece of trash that we found, all 3 different colors. And that one did its bluff thing when we picked it up. And then when that didn't work, when we put it down, it rolled over and played dead. So yeah, sometimes they just do it. So the next group of snakes is some small snakes that you can hold in your hand. There's only one of these that's protected. So you can find these guys by flipping things over, rocks, like I said, trash, boards and things like that. DeKay's brown snake is probably one of the more common. It's not really common for us here because I would say it tends to be found more in suburban and urban places than out in forests, it seems like. But they are found all over Massachusetts, probably even in downtown Boston in vacant lots and things. They're only about a foot long. They are all brown. but they have, beautiful markings. They're very calm. The snake would never bite you. They survive on slugs and termite larvae and eggs and things like that. This is its congener, that genus Storeria. So the other one was Storeria decay. This is Storeria occipito-maculata, which is a Latin word meaning spots at the occiput, which is the back part of the skull. So I think the Latin name is named after probably one of the least identifiable field marks on this snake, when the most identifiable field mark is the fact that its belly is completely bright red. So again, a little snake, but if you find a little brown snake like this under something, turn it over, because if it's red underneath, it's a red-bellied. If it's not, then it's a Decay's brown snake. These are probably one of the more common things that you might see too if you're turning over rocks and you do find a snake, and this is northern ringnecked. They're very identifiable. You can see that, speaking of smooth scales, you can see pretty well that this guy has completely smooth scales. And a lot of the smooth scaled snakes are almost iridescent. They're very shiny. And this is a beautiful little critter. Has a yellow around the neck and all yellow belly. I had said before that you can keep 2 of anything that's not protected. These guys are common, and you could potentially keep one for a pet, but I really wouldn't recommend doing that, because you're not going to be able to get it to eat in captivity, and it's just going to wither away and die. They're very specialized in the sort of things that they look for, and unless you're raising termite larvae or something, you're probably not going to be able to keep it alive. This is the one state-listed species that we have that's a little snake. Just ignore the fact no one is actually holding the snake in their hand. So don't be fooled. This is really rare, again, because we live at the northern edge of its range. In the southeast, it's also a common garden snake that people find, under the trash pile behind their garage. But here it's really rare. And again, has smooth scales, and so it looks somewhat iridescent. But it's a brownish gray snake with a pink belly that looks like an earthworm, and it eats earthworms, so it's well named. I think that this is probably our favorite of all the little snakes, the smooth green snake. It's absolutely beautiful. We rarely see them. We've only seen them a few times in Massachusetts. Even if we wanted to, we wouldn't be able to tell you where's a good place to go see one. They're just found in, I don't know, they're found in barren areas like power line cuts sometimes, and
low bush blueberry balls on the top of hills seems to be a great place to find them if you're lucky enough to find one.
So there are 2 green snake species in North America, and the other one is rough green snake, but you don't have to worry about telling them apart, because rough green snake doesn't get any further north than New Jersey. And it also has keeled scales, whereas smooth green snake has smooth scales. But they are absolutely beautiful. They are just as beautiful green as this photograph, with a nice bright yellow throat. They're amazing little creatures. Totally docile and calm. If you pick it up, it's just going to sit in your hand. They're great.
How far north is the green snake? Because we had someone that made a comment that, is it possible they've seen it in Canada?
Yes. Yes, they get into Nova Scotia. I think they're on Prince Edward Island, New Brunswick. Yes, and into Quebec, maybe even northern Quebec. So yes, they're definitely in Canada. The smooth green snake, the same one we have. These are, this one and the next one, the timber rattlesnake, are 2 famous state-listed species. And everyone sees one. I shouldn't say everyone. Lots of people see these guys all over the place and report them and swear that their uncle told them it was a copperhead or a timber rattlesnake. And so they don't believe anyone who tells them there wasn't. But we're here to tell you that it's extremely unlikely that you're going to be able to see one of these in the wild. You might, but one of the reasons for that is that they spend the winter in den sites. That it means that they have to be in a rocky place where they can get into not just a pile of rocks, but a rocky area with deep, almost cave-like features where they can get way down, below the frost line where it stays warm enough through the winter that they can survive. There's only a few dens for each of these species in the whole state, and they don't go more than 5 miles or less from their den in the summertime. And so that means that 95% of Massachusetts, there's no way that you could see a copperhead or a rattlesnake because they simply don't live there. But that doesn't stop people from swearing up and down that they see them all the time. I mean, it is worth, if you're not sure, I would say don't get close to it. Neither of them chase people. They don't attack people. They're not like a racer. They're not aggressive. They're not belligerent. They're sit and wait predators. They have vertical pupils. They have a wide head that encompasses their venom gland, but they do have this blotchy pattern. And I would say that learning to identify them is like learning to identify fall warblers or sparrows. It's not impossible. It's not even all that difficult to some extent, but it does require paying attention to the field marks between them and the other species that they look somewhat alike. And it's possible to do that. So you can learn exactly what to look for and tell them apart from the ones that they get mistaken for. Rattlesnakes have a more blotchy pattern, I would say, than copperheads and are a less distinctive color. Copperheads tend to be that reddish, almost purplish or orangey brown of the one in the previous slide, whereas rattlesnakes tend to be more brown, yellowy brown, or sometimes almost blackish brown with these blotches. So, you know, you can understand how some people can get confused about it. Both these guys have keeled scales, and so they have a very rough looking appearance, and both are state listed. So you do need to leave them alone if for no other reason than it's illegal to bother them. Here's one of the species that gets mistaken for a copperhead or a rattlesnake all the time, northern water snake. As Joe said, if you want to be bitten, pick up a racer or pick up a water snake. Nasty, nasty critters. And besides just biting you, they also have this really foul-smelling musk from the cloaca, and so they'll discharge that and smear it around on you with their tail at the same time that they're biting you in the arm. They usually live either in the water or right on the edge of the water, so that's a little bit different than a copperhead or a rattlesnake that tends to live in rocky habitats. But, I mean, this one's a fairly colorful one. They're not always so red like this. So this one, you know, I mean, I could see that people would be concerned if they saw it and say, oh, that could be a rattlesnake or a copperhead. Well, it isn't, but there are similarities. Water snakes do tend to have these really narrow, regularly spaced lines across here, which is not the same as a copperhead or a rattlesnake. I want to talk about milk snakes. So I would say this is another one that is commonly mistaken for a copperhead or a rattlesnake. And this is a particularly confusing looking individual because it's brown, it has blotches. They do have smooth scales, not keeled scales. But if you can't tell and you're trying to get closer to see if the scales are keeled or smooth and you don't know, then I would say just don't bother, because then you don't know if you're seeing a copperhead or a rattlesnake or not. Don't get so close that you're looking to see what kind of scales it has. But here's another milk snake. You can see that the milk snakes, like all the colubrids, have round pupils, not slits for pupils like the pit vipers do. But this is a very different colored milk snake. When they're young, they tend to have these more reddish bands like this. And milk snakes also underneath have this checkerboard pattern that the pit vipers don't really have. And even our rat snake and racers, the young ones, are probably, or at least possibly, mimics of the blotchy pattern that the pit vipers have. This may protect them, at least for the first year or so, when after that, this pattern starts to fade and they turn black like the adults. But the hatchlings look very much like a milk snake, and then potentially like one of the pit vipers. And then finally, our introduced lizard. Massachusetts has old records of a lizard called common five-lined skink, and they are just south of us in Connecticut, and there are actually some records in Rhode Island. And so if you live near either of those states or visit those areas, it's potentially worth looking for five-lined skinks, but none have been positively confirmed in the state I think, since the 1800s. But at any rate, this lizard is a recent arrival. Want to tell them?
So if you want to find a wonderful Italian wall lizard, after you finish your visit seeing the Red Sox lose at Fenway Park, go over to the Victory Gardens, and in the Victory Gardens, you'll go find their big compost heaps. And these guys like to live in the compost heaps. First of all, there's a lot of food there, but they need the compost heaps because in the winter, that's where they kind of hang out for the winter. The compost keeps them warm enough where they don't die over the winters for us.
So yeah, they're Italian, so they're from the Mediterranean, so they're used to cold winters, but they're not probably capable of surviving a frozen cold Massachusetts winter without the help of that compost generated heat. But it's totally cool. Go to the Victory Gardens, ask any gardener there, where's the compost pile? Go look, and you'll see Italian wall lizards sitting on top of the compost. It's great. And that, I think, is it. We put in a couple of links. This is, if you want to go to the MassGov site, and they have details about every single one of the amphibians and reptiles in the state. And so that's a great place to go for information. SSAR Herps, the Society for the Study of Amphibians and Reptiles, is the national scientific organization. They publish the Journal of Herpetology, they publish Herpetological Review. So, and they have tons of information on their website. So if you're interested, you know, from a more scientific point of view, I would go there. And then this is where we got the calls of the frogs and toads. And we should probably also thank Warner Brothers for that.
And also, we noted that, you know, some of these are state listed species there. So if you do see any of these state listed species, it would be wonderful for Mass Wildlife if you reported them to the Natural Heritage site. It's kind of a pain in the neck, their site to go on for the web to get them all loaded up there. They definitely want pictures, so take pictures of things there. But if you see any of those state listed critters there, they would love to know where you saw them, what they were doing there, and so they could add them to their database.
And if you're able to take a picture and have the GPS on there, they love that at Heritage Hub. And I think it's heritagehub.com or heritagehub.org is the website. But if you just go to mass.gov and, you know, or Google it, you can find the right website to go to. We probably should have put it on here, but I forgot. And that's it. And we're happy to answer questions.
Bill, not a question, but I haven't been there in recent years, but we used to hear Fowler's toads in an area east of the Montague Plains at a water facility called Green Pond.
Yeah, that would make perfect sense. Like I said, they do really like sandy habitat. They are toad specialists, and Montague Plains is kind of our local version of a pine barrens.
Yeah, David Spector has mentioned that he's heard them up there to us a couple times.
Yeah, so yeah, that's a good idea, a good place to look. Maybe we'll check it out too.
No questions, but a lot of thank yous.
I have a question. This is Janice. So, over what period of time did it take you to get all those pictures or do your? I mean, when you did your Herp Big Year, how successful? What did you accomplish?
Well, we saw all the terrestrial herps except for 2.
Oh wow!
Hognose snakes were our nemesis species that year. We went looking for hognose snakes many times, and we missed them. And the other one we couldn't see was something called a bog turtle, and they're on Nature Conservancy land. You can't go there without special permission. So.
Yeah, bog turtles are really rare state listed species that only lives in a few places in Massachusetts, a few actual specific sites. And they should be called fen turtles because they live in alkaline wetlands instead of acid wetlands. But every single place, and there's only like 3 or 4 in Massachusetts where they occur, is owned by the Nature Conservancy, and you're not allowed to go there. So it's not a species that you can go and see. But those were the only 2, except we also only, of the 5 sea turtles, we really legally only saw Kemp's Ridley because we told you that you can go up and go along the beaches. So when we say each high tide, that's like every 12 hours. So at 3 o'clock in the morning, we were walking along a beach on Cape Cod Bay, and we walked right past a cold stunned loggerhead turtle that at dawn some other people found and brought in to be rehabbed. So we actually missed it only because it was so dark we didn't see it. So that's the ones that we missed were the 4 sea turtle species and then those other 2. But yeah, so I mean, we take herp pictures all the time when we see things worth taking a picture of. I think some of the photos at least were from 2013 from the big year. And when we did our big year, we actually gave a talk to a couple of classrooms of kids after that big year, and we put together some photo things even then. So yeah, I would say it's really ever since then for the past 10, 11 years that we've been herping and taking a lot of pictures.
I have one more question. Would you do a herp field trip?
Sure, we would. Yeah, I mean, we feel a little funny that, it's the Hampshire Bird Club, but we do the same thing. We do the same thing to the butterfly people. We annoy them with herps at the butterfly club meetings too. So
Yeah, we
I
did
guess
with the Athol bird. And
yeah, we did actually with the Athol Bird and Nature Club. We did a herp field trip along with Dave Small, who some of you might know.
it was kind of a rainy, miserable day, but
Yeah,
we
it
were
wasn't
still
the
out there
best
and
day. We
seeing
did
some
see
things.
things, but it wasn't the best day weather-wise. But it was good. Sorry, I clicked again and the slide went away. So
No, with the end slide, so I don't know if
yeah.
did you have another slide?
No, there aren't any more, but I just
Okay. Sally, go for it.
I may have missed this, but I don't understand why the turtles that can get have to be rescued from the cold live in an area where they have to be rescued from the cold.
So, yeah, so I'll give you the longer story, and if it gets so long that you need to sign off, then let me know.
Question of geography.
So Kemp's Ridley sea turtles, the adults lay eggs on the Gulf of Mexico, coast of Mexico, and Central America. And for their first year, those little hatchlings grow in size from a potato chip to a
Dinner
dessert
plate.
plate. Yeah. And then in their second year, they leave the Caribbean and they migrate up the East Coast and actually end up going across the Atlantic. And a lot of them go into the Mediterranean. But on their way, some of them, they go up the East Coast, they go along Cape Cod, and they get to the northern part, and they're just like foraging around and eating. And so they'll go, towards the coast. But you know how Cape Cod is shaped, that elbow shape. And when they get to the top part, they'll go down into Cape Cod Bay and they'll feed in there. Well, if you think about the way weather happens in the fall and weather fronts, it's all coming from the north. And so the turtles know enough that they're not going to swim into cold water that they can't survive. The problem is that the northern end of Cape Cod gets cold while the southern part of Cape Cod Bay is still warm enough for them to be doing their thing. So they get, if they go to leave, they go up toward Provincetown and, around Wellfleet up towards Truro and Provincetown, and the water's getting too cold. So they turn around and they go back south again. And for a while, for a few weeks, it's warm enough there that they swim around and stay there. But eventually the cold catches up to them and it gets all the way across Cape Cod Bay, and it gets so cold that they can't get out. And the turtles have been around for millions of years, and Cape Cod Bay has not been around for millions of years. And so it's probably an accident of glaciation and whatever that they've just, they get stuck there. And it's not just the Kemp's Ridleys, the loggerheads get stuck too, but they survive longer. So it's usually not till December. So I don't know if that helps.
Yes.
Yeah. But it's a really interesting story. And like I said, if you're, you can go and join for the weekend. I think you can still do that at Wellfleet. And it's a really fun thing to do because you learn all sorts of stuff.
Thank you.
Sure.
I saw 15 painted turtles on one log a couple weeks ago. Is that a normal amount? Heard that a lot.
Yeah, they
It's a
they
lot.
do that big pile on there, they're climbing all over each other there, but yeah, they're happy chappies, yeah.
I think people think though that they do that because they like it, because they like it to be on top of the other turtles. But I've heard that they don't really like it. It's just that there's only a few places that are really like the perfect spot for sunning, and they all want to be at that one spot. And so they climb on top of each other, and there's like this dominant stuff apparently that goes on, like who's the boss, who gets the best spot, who's on top of the pile, who gets pushed off. I mean, people have actually studied this, I think. So yeah, it's interesting.
They were really cute. There was
Yeah.
plenty of room, and this was a really long log, and
Oh, really? So,
almost all of them had a little head on top of the other one, or a little, it
oh,
was
yeah. So
really
maybe
cute.
maybe it's a social thing. Yeah, I don't know.
I don't know.
Yeah, it's cool.
How big do snapping turtles get?
Um, I'm not. What do you think? I mean,
Yeah, I would say pretty big. They can
maybe
get
2 feet long.
yeah, they can
I
State
don't know.
record is in Massachusetts.
Really,
Was found in Massachusetts. Yeah.
really. Do you know how much it weighed or anything?
It was I think 65 pounds or something like that.
Yeah.
Wow.
So there is another species of snapping turtle called the alligator snapping turtle that lives in the Mississippi drainage, and they get gigantic, several 100 pounds. They're the ones that will sit on the bottom of the river with their mouth open and their tongue looks like a little worm that they wiggle to try to get fish to come so they can grab onto it. Yeah, they can get really huge. But our eastern one is big, but not as big. The ones that you see, like if you're out and driving and you see one on the road, it's almost certainly a female looking for a place to lay eggs. They are mostly always aquatic snapping turtles, except for egg laying.
What's your favorite way of helping a snapping turtle across the road?
Well, it depends, I guess. If it wasn't, supposedly you can pick them up by the tail, but I would not do that because it's bad for their tail and you can break
No, you
their
can't.
tail. Yeah. But so we've never tried that. And I mean, like apparently you think too, I just think it's a bad idea. You can also apparently pick them up on either side of the tail by holding tightly to the back of the top shell and lift them up that way. But you really, really have to be careful because their neck is like a snake and they can reach around. Like, I don't know if you do that, if some of them might be able to reach around and grab your arm. So my advice is get something that you can shove the turtle off the road with. Like if you have anything in your car, even like a blanket or something.
preferably in the direction it was heading.
Yeah, but like if you can just ball something up that you can just push the turtle with that doesn't put your hands in harm's way or your arms, that would be my advice.
Keep your windshield scraper in your car or
Yeah, something that you can use to push it. I'm not sure that that's the best thing for their bottom shell either, but it's probably better than being hit by a car.
I have coaxed them onto tarps and then dragged the tarp across.
Oh,
really?
yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah. I mean, I don't know that we've really had to do it very often, but I think that we shoved when we had to do it.
right, yeah. Small enough we can pick it up and move it otherwise. Be
No,
careful.
We know enough to be afraid. Yeah, they're very dangerous. And so are soft shells. I wasn't joking when I said that
Yeah,
would make
they-
a horrible
They
pet.
will bite.
They bite like snapping turtles and they may have soft carapaces, but they have very sharp jaws and they can do just as much damage as a snapping turtle and also really long snaky necks. So yeah, leave them alone. You're not really going to get close to a soft shell anyway. We actually went out with the state herpetologist trying to net some of those things along that stretch of that island there in Holyoke, and it didn't work. But we had put nets under the water and then went and checked them. Nets that it's hard to explain, but it's kind of like a mist net that's right at the top is at the surface of the water and then it extends down into the water. And the idea was they would get trapped, but they could still come up to breathe. But we didn't get any.
Our success was 0.
Yeah, 0. Well,
Okay, are there any more questions? Fabulous, fabulous information. I have to figure out how to go see those in Holyoke.
Yeah, it's
Easy.
really,
Just
yeah,
go to
it's
the
easy.
bridge.
Yeah, just go to the
That's
bridge.
a strange looking turtle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know. I have to follow, re-listen to what you said, how to get there.
Yeah,
Or-
well, basically you just go to the fish ladder and but the fish ladder's, the parking area is north of the river on the, like, when you're going across that bridge, the obvious thing on if you were going from South Hadley to Holyoke, the obvious thing on your right-hand side is the dam and all the water and the rocks and
Yeah.
everything. The turtles are not on the dam side of the bridge, they're on the other side of the bridge, the south side. And they're on the Holyoke side, not the South Hadley side.
Okay.
Although I will
You
say
know
if you look
know what you have
north,
to do? Find Harvey Allen and say, Harvey,
Right,
take
There
me
you go.
over there.
right.
but that 116 bridge, if you're looking up towards the dam, we see mink there like regularly.
really,
So if you
that's
want
a
to see
really
a
great
mink,
place
it's a
to look for
great place
mink.
to see mink.
Yeah, because there's so many rocks in the water there, and you can spend an hour just looking at the rocks and looking at the different things that are in there, and yeah, it's a pretty cool place. And the bridge has big sidewalks on either side, so it's not like you're taking your life in your hands or anything. It's it's a pedestrian bridge too, so
Yeah.
yeah, it's easy to be on there.
We've even seen map turtles from the bridge, but
Yeah.
they're like another
Yeah, we didn't-
introduced
We didn't
species.
mention that map turtles is another problem. So red-eared sliders, a lot of you may know red-eared sliders. When we were kids, they used to sell them at like,
Two Guys and
Two Guys and Grants and all those little department stores. And then they made it illegal to sell anything less than 4 inches because if it was less than 4 inches, it could still fit in a child's mouth. But if it was greater than 4 inches, they couldn't stick it in their mouth and get salmonella. So they made the 4-inch rule. But then Massachusetts decided about 10 years ago just to make them illegal, period, because of the problem of people letting them go and being introduced. So what Petco and the other big box stores did is they switched to map turtles. So instead of selling red-eared sliders, now they sell map turtles. And so we've started to see map turtles, like, when we were doing that trapping that day for spiny soft shells, we actually saw a map turtle swimming around in the Connecticut River. They're a good sized map turtle, like, and they could easily also survive here. They live in Lake Champlain, so it's not like they can't survive the winter. So that may be our next introduced problem. We'll see. Yep. Anyway, life is good.
Well, thank you very, very much. Think we probably have more questions, but it'll take us a while to figure it out. And this is being recorded, so you will be able to see it on our Hampshire Bird Club webpage. Thank you all for coming and all your questions. And thank you, Bill and Joe. This was fab.
Thank you. This is a great presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Look down, don't look up all the time.